Nazi methods of control, government and opposition. Podcast 6. Now this podcast is different from the previous 5 because it is looking at a typical essay question that you could get as either question 5B or 6B in the exam. And remember, the essay questions carry 16 marks, which is around about 24 or 25 minutes, the length of time you should spend on it. This particular question, let's have a look at it. You're given a quote, it's an interpretation, it's a viewpoint of a historian, and you're asked, do you agree with this particular viewpoint? And the viewpoint is, Nazi methods of control were effective in dealing with opposition in the years 1933 to 45. So what you're being asked to do here is to debate, first of all, what were the methods of control, but secondly, were they effective? So there's two parts to the question there. What were the methods and were they effective? And clearly you asked, do you agree? So therefore you should be arguing for, it should be the answer should move backwards and forwards with an argument and counter argument. You should argue a case that they were effective, and you should argue a case that they were not effective. So the best approach with this type of question is to identify the different methods of control, and for each method of control write one paragraph agreeing with it and saying yes, in some ways this was effective, and then write another paragraph to say in other ways that method was not effective. So you are debating between the 2 points. So if you read the model essay, you will see how it approaches it. So again, very, very importantly, remember what an examiner does is the first thing is they want to see paragraphing. With the essay question, they give you, remember, bonus marks for quality of written communication, and that is not just spelling, it's not just punctuation, it is how you've organised your answer. And so paragraphing will immediately score you extra marks. So there needs to be an introduction, there needs to be a conclusion, and then there needs to be separate paragraphs on each of the main themes. And again, the sort of linking words, another method, the word finally. Those connecting words are really, really important. One method of control, and so on. So as you read that answer, look at the way in which it is put together. So, why is that a good answer? Okay. Well, first of all, the opening paragraph, the introduction, gives an overview of the different types of control. So you want to show the examiner straight away that you do understand that controlling was not just about terror. Many candidates write very simplistic answers, and they almost assume the only method of control was fear. Now, we've just done a series of podcasts in which we've identified that there were lots of techniques. It wasn't just about fear, it wasn't just about concentration camps and the SS, it was also about propaganda, indoctrination. Many Germans were won over because they believed that the Nazis were doing a good thing. So that's the first paragraph, the introduction. The first proper paragraph then needs to, before you rush into your answer and explain were the methods effective, just take some time in the first proper paragraph to talk about why there was opposition and the reasons why the Nazis needed to deal with it. Now, clearly a key point is that the Nazis was what we call a totalitarian system. It was a system that claimed total control over the German people. So that word, if you look at the model answer, is a lovely word to try to use in GCSE essays. The Nazi system was a totalitarian system. What that basically means is it was a dictatorship, but it was a dictatorship in which the main aim was to control not just what people did, but the way in which people thought. Hitler wanted total and absolute obedience, and he wanted people to obey because they believed in Nazism. Now, that was not the case in 1933. As we know, just after Hitler became Chancellor in March 1933, 44% voted for the Nazis, but more than half didn't. That was why Hitler needed to deal with opponents. So you needed to be able to talk about who the opponents were. And a quick glance at that paragraph is you'll see how it does that. It says that there were the Catholics, there was the Social Democrats, and in particular there were the Communists. They needed to be removed. But even the people who, on one level, supported the Nazis and had voted for them, they were the older generation. They only supported the Nazis because they thought Hitler was going to give them jobs. But what after that? After Hitler had created jobs, would they passionately follow him to war? Probably not, because the older generation had been brought up in the Weimar Republic. The only generation that Hitler could really trust were the children, because they could be indoctrinated from the word go. So that's an important paragraph, the first proper paragraph. You then move into the main body of the essay, which consists of 3 building blocks of paired paragraphs. So one paragraph explaining a type of control, and then the follow-up paragraph explaining how effective that type of control was. So a description of the control, and then a paired paragraph that analyses was it effective. And so the 3 building blocks, so 3 lots of paired paragraphs. The first paired paragraph is about political violence, the second is about the police state, and the third is about propaganda and indoctrination. And then the conclusion pulls together the threads and gives a clear judgment. So the plan would look like this. So there's the introduction, that which we just looked at a moment ago. Makes it very clear that there were a variety of methods of control. Paragraph 1 it talks about the totalitarian state and about why the Nazis needed to control. You then have paired paragraphs about political violence. The first one, paragraph 2, is about the method, and that paragraph will be about the Reichstag fire, the Enabling Act, the fact that Hitler used the SA to beat up the communists and arrest them in the early years, and then so the sort of brutality, the violence that was used, particularly in the first 6 months against the communists. And then paragraph 3 would look at, was that effective? Well, you'd obviously want to say yes, it was. The trade unions were crushed, the communists were put into concentration camps, and most importantly, it convinced the middle classes that Hitler was running Germany in their interests. So it was a very effective way of getting the middle classes to support the Nazis. You then move into the next paired paragraphs, which looks at the method of the police state. So in that particular paragraph you would talk about the SS, how from 1934 onwards, after the Night of the Long Knives, the real method of control was the concentration apparatus, the Gestapo, the block wardens, etc., about the fact that people became isolated, about the fact that the communists were put in jail, socialists were put into the concentration camps, but undesirables were put into concentration camps. That was the main method. Was it effective? In paragraph 5. So again, have a look at that one. And again, the point you want to make is that in the early years it was very, very effective. The middle classes believed it was a good thing. They thought the Nazis were creating discipline and law and order. The concentration camps were being used only to remove the communists. That was helping the middle classes. It also was very effective because it isolated people. People were afraid publicly to denounce, or were afraid publicly to make jokes or to grumble. So that was a way of reducing opposition to Hitler. It turned people into perhaps silent opponents in their own minds. They perhaps didn't agree, but they didn't dare speak out. So that in a sense was effective, although you could argue that it was ineffective because many people were what we call passive followers rather than active believers. And then the final double section of the answer is paragraph 6 and 7. It's a paired paragraph which looks at the propaganda. So again, in paragraph 6 you talk about the propaganda techniques, you talk about Joseph Goebbels, you talk about the successes of the early years, 33 to 37, the winning over of the middle classes, the fact that jobs were created, Hitler created pride in the country, the way in which he remilitarised the Rhineland, Hitler's birthday, the plebiscites, all of those sorts of things that we've covered. You can mention in that paragraph. Was that effective? Is then paragraph 7. So you move into that paragraph 7, and you want to argue, well, did that really work? And here is where you want to put across the fact, well, perhaps in the early years it did, but certainly as war approached in the late 1930s, increasingly more and more people were unhappy. So people like Pastor Martin Niemöller spoke out. You can mention the Confessional Church, you can mention the Edelweiss Pirates, you could mention young people refusing to join the Hitler Youth, and a lot of grumbling as war approached. People were unhappy with the fact that their basic standard of living hadn't improved. We'll pick up a lot of those themes when we do the revision session about the economy. And then in your conclusion, you obviously want to balance that out. Weigh the various factors against each other. Try to make the really important point in your conclusion that in the early years that many people, not everybody, but particularly the middle classes, admired the Nazis in particular for crushing communism. But in the later years, from about 1937 onwards, as war approached and as the regime became more focused on preparation for war, then everything became much more repressive. It became the SS and the concentration camp became more visible, and many Germans became disillusioned with the Nazis. But by that point, the SS was so powerful that most Germans did not dare speak out. Okay, so as with all essays, the important thing is that you cover those building blocks. Those of you who can write fast will get more into each paragraph, but don't worry about that. The important point is you get the sort of key points across in each paragraph, and the key points in your model answer are highlighted in bold. Hope that was useful for you. That's a typical question. 25 minutes to sort of work your way through that type of answer. Have a go at it at home, okay? Pace yourself and have a go at it. It would work out at about 3 minutes per paragraph to write that. Thank you.